The story of Matt Lauer is one of the most jarring collapses in the history of American television. A man who spent nearly 2 decades constructing the image of a trusted, authoritative presence in millions of living rooms every single morning, only to have that image dismantled in a single day, and then reconstructed piece by piece into something far darker than anyone who watched him on their screens could have imagined. What makes this story so persistently disturbing is not simply what Matt Lauer did, though what he did was serious, documented, and in at least one account criminal, but rather the architecture of silence that surrounded him for years, the institutional machinery that protected him, the warnings that were heard and ignored, and the way a man of enormous professional power used that power not just to advance his career, but to shield himself from accountability while allegedly causing ongoing harm to the women who worked around him. New details have continued to emerge in the years since his firing, and taken together, they paint a portrait that is devastating not only in what it reveals about Lauer himself, but in what it reveals about how television networks operate when the most valuable person in their building is also the most dangerous one. To understand the full weight of what eventually came to light, you have to understand how unlikely Matt Lauer's ascent was in the first place, because the height of his fall is directly proportional to the improbability of his rise. Lauer was born on the last day of 1957 in New York City, the son of a father of Romanian Jewish heritage who held an executive role at a bicycle company, and a mother who had worked as a model and operated a small boutique. The family resided in Greenwich, Connecticut, a community associated with old money and comfortable suburban prosperity. But behind that respectable exterior, the household was fractured. His parents separated while he was still a child, and his father left the family home. Lauer grew up with his older sister, April, navigating the disruption of divorce in a neighborhood where appearances were carefully maintained. From early childhood, he was captivated by television, specifically by the people who sat behind desks and delivered the news to the country each day. That fascination grew into an obsession, and when he enrolled at Ohio University's School of Telecommunications, it seemed as though the path toward his ambition had finally opened up. But in the spring of 1979, just 4 credits short of completing his degree, Lauer made the decision that would define his early career. A production internship at WTVF, a CBS affiliate in Huntington, West Virginia, came his way, and he concluded that practical experience in a real broadcast environment was worth more than waiting to collect a diploma. It was a bold gamble, and for a long time, it appeared to be a losing one. The years between 1980 and the early 1990s were relentless and largely humiliating for Lauer in professional terms. He moved from city to city, attached himself to local talk programs and news broadcasts that failed to gain traction, and watched opportunity after opportunity collapse. He co-hosted PM Magazine, a nationally syndicated entertainment and lifestyle program, working successively out of Richmond, Providence, and eventually New York City. When the New York edition of PM Magazine folded in 1986, he and his co-host tried to pivot with a new program called Made in New York. That lasted 15 weeks before cancellation. He then moved to co-host Fame, Fortune, and Romance, a short-lived ABC daytime series built on the coattails of lifestyles of the rich and famous. That collapsed in 1988. He hosted Talk of the Town. Same result. By his own account, he was fired or canceled from 5 consecutive positions during the stretch of his career, and he would later tell interviewers that at his lowest point he had genuinely weighed abandoning broadcasting entirely to work as a tree trimmer. That is not a flourish or a rhetorical device. The man who would eventually become the highest-earning morning television host in the history of American broadcasting sincerely considered walking away from the industry because the industry kept closing its doors in his face. What kept him visible during those lean years was a single recurring gig, hosting Beyond the Screen, an interstitial program on Cinemax that aired between feature films on the premium cable network and featured Lauer in conversation with prominent Hollywood talent. His guests included Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Nicole Kidman, Jerry Seinfeld, Samuel L. Jackson, and Tupac Shakur, among many others. It wasn't journalism in the traditional sense, but it kept him sharp, kept his name circulating in industry conversations, and reminded decision-makers that he was someone capable of holding a room with virtually anyone. The genuine inflection point arrived in September 1989, when Lauer secured the lead hosting role on 9 Broadcast Plaza, a 3-hour live daily interview program on WWTV in New York. 3 hours of unscripted live television is a grueling demand on any broadcaster, and Lauer demonstrated that he was genuinely equal to it. He was quick, he was engaging, he had an instinct for making guests comfortable in ways that produce candid and memorable exchanges. He also demonstrated something that would later seem almost ironic given everything that followed. He had principles. When the show's producers began stacking the guest roster with tabloid fodder, and station management instructed him to deliver live promotional reads for a mattress company in the middle of a broadcast, Lauer resigned rather than comply. He was not willing to trade his credibility for job security. It was that quality, that willingness to endure professional discomfort rather than compromise what he believed the audience deserved, that made NBC pay attention. In 1992, the network brought him in as co-anchor of Today in New York, the morning program on its flagship local station WNBC, placing him inside 30 Rockefeller Plaza for the first time. The following year, he was promoted to co-anchor of Live at 5, working alongside the celebrated Sue Simmons. But the more consequential audition was happening quietly in the background. Every time the Today show needed a temporary replacement, whether at the news desk in the co-anchor seat on Weekend Today, or even covering for Tom Brokaw on NBC Nightly News, Lauer was the name that kept getting called. He filled those seats without complaint, without incident, and without failing. By January 1994, that reliability had earned him a permanent position as the Today Show's news anchor. And on January 6, 1997, when Bryant Gumbel's departure opened the co-anchor seat, Matt Lauer was installed as the face of the most watched morning program in the country. He was 39 years old. That same year, he returned to Ohio University, submitted academic work drawn from his professional experience, completed the 4 remaining credits, received his degree, and delivered the commencement address. By any conceivable measure, it was a redemption story of extraordinary proportions. What followed over the next 2 decades was a dominance of American morning television that is unlikely to be replicated. Lauer's partnership with Katie Couric became one of the most commercially successful pairings in the history of the format. Couric brought genuine warmth and emotional intelligence that made audiences feel a personal connection to her. Lauer operated differently. He was precise, analytically composed, and capable of transitioning from a lighthearted lifestyle segment to a rigorous political interview without losing a step. His delivery had a dry, measured quality, a slight lift of the eyebrow, a practiced ability to press difficult subjects while projecting the reassuring calm of someone who was completely unrattled. Together, they built the Today Show into the undisputed leader of morning television, generating advertising revenue that made it one of the most profitable programs on the entire network. NBC came to regard Lauer as effectively irreplaceable. In 1998, the show introduced a segment that took on a life of its own. Where in the world is Matt Lauer? Dispatching him to remote and striking destinations around the globe during sweeps periods. He reported from Bhutan, broadcast live from Easter Island, stood before the Great Wall of China. The segment ran annually through 2011 and transformed Lauer from a news anchor into something approaching a television adventure, a trusted familiar figure who could transport viewers somewhere extraordinary from the comfort of their living rooms each morning. His annual salary eventually climbed to figures reported at $25 million, with some estimates pushing closer to $28 million. He hosted the Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade every year from 1998 through 2017. He co-hosted broadcasts of 2 Summer Olympics opening ceremonies and 1 Winter Olympics. He sat across from sitting presidents, foreign heads of state, entertained royalty, and conducted interviews that became defining cultural moments. including the 2015 conversation in which Charlie Sheen disclosed on live television that he was HIV positive, and the 2005 exchange with Tom Cruise in which Cruise, visibly frustrated, accused Lauer of being glib during a confrontation about Cruise's public opposition to psychiatry and antidepressant medications. That clip, predating the dominance of social media by years, still spread across the internet and lodged itself in the cultural memory. It appeared to confirm what the public had chosen to believe, that Matt Lauer was a journalist who would not be intimidated by power, who would not give ground, who would hold his position regardless of who was sitting across from him. That was the portrait the public had accepted. The reality assembling itself behind the cameras was something else entirely. The first visible fracture in Lauer's public image did not originate in personal misconduct. It came from how he handled the professional destruction of a colleague. And Curry had spent years building a distinguished career at NBC News, joining the organization in 1990 and serving as the Today Show's news anchor from 1997 onward. In June 2011, she was elevated to co-anchor, succeeding Meredith Vieira in what should have been the apex of a career defined by serious journalism. Instead, according to Brian Stelter's 2013 account in Top of the Morning, Lauer had no interest whatsoever in working alongside Curry. Their relationship off camera was cold and distant. On screen, their interactions felt strained and artificial in ways audiences could detect. Stelter reported that Lauer confided to an assistant that he could not fathom sitting next to Curry every day. Meanwhile, a coordinated removal was being planned with the full knowledge and cooperation of the show's executive producer, Jim Bell. The plan reportedly involved 3 phases: persuade Lauer to renew his contract, remove Curry from the co-anchor role, and install Savannah Guthrie in her place. Those involved gave the operation a name. They called it Operation Bambi, because displacing someone as widely liked and fundamentally decent as Curry felt, by their own admission, like killing an innocent animal. The plan was executed in June 2012. After a single year as co-anchor, Curry was forced out. Her final appearance on the program was excruciating to witness. She sat on the set working to compose herself as tears ran down her face, bidding farewell to an audience that had not been told the full story of what had happened to her. When Lauer moved to embrace her, she turned away. The viewing public reacted with immediate anger, and much of it was directed squarely at Lauer. Social media filled with criticism and condemnation. The show's ratings, which had already been in decline, fell further still. Curry later confided to those close to her that the final months of her tenure had been deliberately cruel, that colleagues had mocked her appearance, comparing her to the Sesame Street character Big Bird during a broadcast in which she wore a yellow dress. Stelter reported that following her departure, senior Today Show executives marked the occasion with a toast. The operation had succeeded, but there was a dimension of the Curry story that would not surface publicly until 2018, and it is among the most damning details in the entire account. In an interview with the Washington Post, Curry disclosed that in 2012, before she was removed from the show, a female NBC employee had approached her in a state of significant distress. The woman feared professional consequences, but felt she had no choice but to tell Curry that Matt Lauer had subjected her to unwanted physical contact of a sexual nature. Curry took the account seriously. She went directly to NBC management and stated plainly that the network needed to monitor Lauer's conduct around women and that something was deeply wrong. The response from management was silence. Nothing was investigated, nothing changed, and within a short time, Curry was no longer employed at the show. When asked years later whether she believed her decision to report Lauer had contributed to her own dismissal, Curry said she was uncertain. She said she had sought an explanation for why she had been replaced and had never received one that satisfied her. The implication hung in the air of that interview like a weight that no one in NBC's leadership appeared willing to acknowledge. 4 or 5 years after Curry's departure, Lauer continued his reign over the Today Show. He and Savannah Guthrie developed a productive working relationship, and together they restored some of the ratings ground the program had lost. He kept securing major interviews, kept hosting the parade, kept traveling internationally for Olympic coverage. And throughout all of that time, according to multiple women who would eventually come forward, a completely different reality was unfolding within his private office at 30 Rockefeller Plaza. That office occupied a secluded corner of the building, removed from the congested corridors where staff moved at pace every morning. A Variety investigation released in November 2017 revealed that Lauer had arranged for a button to be installed beneath his desk that enabled him to lock his office door remotely without leaving his seat. Two women who alleged that Lauer had subjected them to sexual harassment told Variety that he deployed this device to create a sealed environment before initiating unwanted contact. With the press of a button, the door secured itself and no one could enter from outside. One woman described being summoned to his office, where Lauer then exposed himself to her, and when she made clear she would not comply with his expectations, she alleged he punished her professionally. A second woman recounted receiving an explicit sexual device as a gift accompanied by a written note detailing what Lauer said he intended to do with it. He was reported to regularly interrogate female producers about their private lives and sexual histories, framing these exchanges as mutual disclosures when they were anything but. He conducted a recurring exercise with staff in which he ranked the female co-hosts he found sexually desirable. At least 10 individuals with current or former connections to the show confirmed various aspects of this conduct to Variety's reporters. On November 29, 2017, the scaffolding holding Matt Lauer's career in place gave way entirely. That morning, NBC News chairman Andy Lack circulated an internal memo stating that the previous evening, the network had received a detailed formal complaint from an employee alleging inappropriate sexual conduct by Lauer in the workplace. The memo acknowledged that while no formal complaint had been filed in over 20 years, leadership believed the complaint did not represent an isolated situation. Savannah Guthrie and Hoda Kotb then delivered the news to the viewing audience on live television. Guthrie was visibly shaken, and she articulated aloud the disorienting question that millions of people were grappling with simultaneously. How does a person reconcile genuine affection for someone with the discovery that they have caused serious harm to others? The complainant's identity was withheld at her request, and nearly 2 years would pass before it became public. Her name was Brooke Nevils. She had been a producer at NBC News and had traveled to Sochi, Russia in 2014 as a talent assistant supporting former Today co-anchor Meredith Vieira during NBC's Winter Olympics coverage. As detailed in Ronan Farrow's 2019 book Catch and Kill, one evening near the conclusion of the trip, Nevils was at the hotel bar with Vieira and colleagues when Lauer joined the group. Drinks were ordered. Nevils later recalled consuming 6 shots of vodka that evening. At the end of the night, she visited Lauer's hotel room on 2 occasions. The first was to retrieve her press credential, which Lauer had taken in what he characterized as a joke. The second time, he extended an invitation, and she returned. What Nevils described as occurring during that second visit is the account that restructured the entire story and shattered whatever remained of Lauer's public standing. She told Farrow that after she entered the room, Lauer pressed her against the door and kissed her. He then directed her toward the bed and asked whether she wanted to engage in anal sex. She said no. She said it repeatedly. She stated that she was in no condition to give meaningful consent, and she said that, as she was actively expressing her refusal, he proceeded regardless. She told Farrow that she woke the following morning in physical pain and that she experienced bleeding for days afterward. She never went to the police. She was in a foreign country. She was a junior employee at a network where Lauer's authority was effectively total, and his annual salary was $25 million. She later described the calculation she faced in stark and heartbreaking terms. She was in Russia, and her only recourse was NBC, and NBC was Matt Lauer. In the months after returning from Sochi, Nevils described having further sexual contact with Lauer in New York. She characterized these subsequent encounters as transactional, driven by fear rather than desire. She said the guilt she carried for those encounters ran deeper than what she felt about that first night in Sochi. She said she was afraid of what Lauer could do to her professionally. She spoke to colleagues. She told people in positions above her. She confided in friends. No one intervened. Nothing shifted. It was not until the fall of 2017, when the revelations about Harvey Weinstein cracked open a cultural reckoning and the Me Too movement began to take hold, that Nevils finally told Vieira the full story. Vieira, according to Farrow's account, was devastated. She directed Nevils to obtain legal counsel and file a formal complaint with NBC's Human Resources Department. Within 24 hours of that meeting, Matt Lauer was terminated. The story did not conclude with his firing. In the days that followed, NBC's senior leadership worked to frame the underlying incident as something short of what Nevils had actually described. According to Farrow, both NBC News President Noah Oppenheim and Chairman Andrew Lack stressed publicly that what had occurred was not a criminal act and did not constitute assault. Nevils had not yet applied the word rape to what had happened to her. But Farrow reported that in her meeting with NBC officials, she had described events that unambiguously satisfied the legal definition of rape or sexual assault under applicable law. The network's public framing and the substance of her account were in direct conflict, and that conflict was not incidental. It reflected a deliberate institutional choice about how to manage the story. The question of what NBC knew, and when it knew it, then became central to the entire account. An internal review completed in May 2018 concluded that no one in NBC News leadership had received any reports concerning Lauer's behavior prior to November 2017. Farrow's investigation told a fundamentally different story. He reported that multiple sources indicated NBC had entered into as many as 7 non-disclosure agreements with women across a 6 to 7 year period, and that several of those agreements involved women making allegations against Lauer specifically, all of it predating Nevils' complaint by years. Linda Vester, a former NBC News correspondent, stated publicly that those in management positions could not have been unaware of the problem, adding that within the organization, it was broadly understood that Lauer represented a danger to the women around him. A further and more explosive dimension of Farrow's reporting involved Harvey Weinstein directly. Farrow's sources alleged that Weinstein had obtained knowledge of the accusations against Lauer and leveraged that information to pressure NBC into suppressing Farrow's own investigation into Weinstein's crimes. That institutional self-protection at NBC had intersected with Weinstein's calculated efforts to neutralize journalism that threatened him, and that the network had chosen to protect its own interests rather than act on what it knew. NBC rejected this account entirely, maintaining that it had declined to publish Farrow's Weinstein reporting solely because it required additional substantiation, which is why Farrow ultimately brought the story to The New Yorker, where it ran and helped trigger one of the most significant cultural reckonings in modern American history. In the years since his termination, Lauer has remained largely out of public view. He attempted on at least one occasion to offer a public response to Nevils' account, characterizing portions of it as inaccurate and disputed. Nevils and her attorneys responded firmly, and the broader record, the corroboration gathered by Farrow, the accounts of additional women, the documented pattern of behavior confirmed by former colleagues, did not shift in his favor. Addie Zinone, who had worked as a production assistant on the Today Show, stated publicly that she and Lauer had a sexual relationship in June 2000 and that it represented an abuse of power because she believed refusing him would have cost her her career. The accumulation of accounts across multiple years, multiple women, and multiple categories of behavior formed a picture that was no longer possible to dispute in its essential contours. What Brooke Nevils wrote at the close of her memoir carried a moral weight that no press statement or public denial could touch. She wrote about being a married mother of 2 children now, and about the anguish she feels knowing they may one day encounter what she chose to make public. But she also wrote about the responsibility she feels to equip them for life's most difficult truths. Part of fulfilling that responsibility, she wrote, means being honest with them, acknowledging that she was not without fault while also being clear that what was done to her was something she never deserved. That statement sits at the moral core of this entire story. It is the one thing Matt Lauer's account cannot address. It is the one thing NBC's internal processes cannot resolve, and it is the one thing that will remain attached to both of them permanently. The story of Matt Lauer is not ultimately about the collapse of a television career. It is about the cost of institutional silence, the way power insulates those who wield it from the consequences of what they do, and the reality that the warnings were there early, specific, and credible, and that the people with the authority to act on them chose not to. That choice made everything that followed not just possible, but inevitable.